Cueing intro. Three, two.
Welcome back to the 10-second runoff powered by Culture Media with your host, Joe Mitchell. Alec Escade is not here today, but all good. Magic Mike Ishiaza is behind the camera.
We here. We out
there
here.
He is.
It's a good day.
Is it? Is it a good day?
It's a good life, Joe.
It is a good life.
It's a good life.
I love that. It was definitely a good weekend of college football. There's lots of fun games. Before we get into breaking those games down, we do have the new AP poll. Run through those real quick. There's a couple things on here that I'm iffy about, but, whatever. All right, let's run through it. Number 1, Georgia. Number 2, Michigan. 3, Texas. Ohio State at 4. Florida State at 5. Penn State at 6. Washington at 7. Oregon at 8. USC at 9. Notre Dame at 10. Anything stick out to you in that top 10?
I mean, not really. No.
No?
Off jump. What about you? What do you think?
Not necessarily. Ohio State being down there at 4 is a little interesting to me. I think they could probably be up at 3 ahead of Texas, but I mean that's just cutting hairs. Washington over Oregon, I like that personally. I know Alec would hate that. I like that personally, but from a objective standpoint, I feel like Oregon's shown you more defensively. So I understand an argument either way. I'm not necessarily mad at it though. USC at 9. After that weird game against Colorado, which we'll talk about, I don't know if I'd have them that high per se. I would have dropped them down a little bit, but it's hard to drop a team after winning. So, again, not necessarily angry about it.
Especially with Colorado. Like, Colorado's just a weird team right now. Like, they're winning games, they're losing games, they're getting blown out. So, I mean, I'm not mad at – like, I wouldn't drop them. So, I get it.
Yeah. Then at 11 through 15, you have Alabama, Oklahoma, Washington State. Washington State's still undefeated, by the way. North Carolina and Oregon State. And then 16 through 20, Ole Miss at 16. Big win. We'll talk about that one. 17, Miami. Utah at 18 after their loss to Oregon State. Duke at 19 and Kentucky at 20. Kentucky was not ranked last week. They jumped all the way up to 20, which is interesting. I'm not mad at it. Again, we'll talk when we get there. 21 through 25, Missouri, Tennessee, LSU, Fresno State, and Louisville. All right. Because I just gave the AP ratings, I'm going to go through, or the AP rankings. I'll go ahead and mention my new top 10 power ratings, and then just got Red Cup's top 10 power ratings as well, so we'll blow through those real quick. I have, and I know I'm going to get hate for this, but this is what I have.
This is interesting. This is interesting, but I like it.
Are you looking at it?
I am. Of course I'm looking at it.
So for the first time this year, I do not have Georgia at number 1 in my power ratings.
And the crowd gasps.
I have Michigan at number 1. I think they've just done everything right so far. They've blown out everybody they're supposed to blow out. I know you can say they don't necessarily have a super tough schedule. You can't fault them for that, right? If you don't have a super tough schedule, what do you have to do? You have to beat the piss out of everybody you play, and that's what they're doing. So they're winning the games. They're winning the games that they have as you would expect them to win them. So again, I like Michigan there right now. Georgia at number 2 showed some faults there. Auburn started out running the ball really, really well in that game, and Georgia struggled a couple times. Now they got Ladd McConkey back. That argument's not necessarily there anymore. I still think Georgia's damn near a playoff lock. That may be a stretch. I expect Georgia to be in the playoffs still. Right now I have them at 2, though. Ohio State at 3, Oregon at 4. I had Oregon at 3 last week, but I think Ohio State, I think there's just an argument to put them up there. Ohio State was on a bye this week, so they didn't do anything to lose. All I did was just bump Michigan up. I had Ohio State ahead of Michigan last week, so at 5, I have Penn State, 6, Texas, 7, Florida State, 8, Washington, 9, Oklahoma, 10, Notre Dame. This is the first time having Oklahoma in my top 10 power ratings, but again, they put up 50 points yet again in another big win, and looking really, really good so far, or as of late, rather. All right, Red Cup's top 10. I'm going to just run through it. I can't speak for him. All I can do is tell you what his top 10 are. So he's got Georgia at 1, Michigan at 2, Ohio State at 3, Florida State at 4, Washington at 5, Penn State at 6, Texas at 7, Oregon at 8, Notre Dame at 9, USC at 10. I did not have USC in mind.
You hate USC.
I don't hate USC. I think there's a team that is really, really, really comparable to USC that I'll talk about here later, but that team is ranked a lot lower than them. So I'll give my piece on that in a little bit. All right. So let's get into the games. Number 1, Georgia at Auburn. Georgia was a 14.5-point favorite. I picked Auburn to cover last week. Nailed that. Look, Auburn jumped out to an early lead, 10-0. They were running it all over Georgia. Payton Thorne got a big run on the read option early in the game, went right down to Georgia's 30. Jarquez Hunter running with authority, punishing that Georgia defense. It felt like first contact, he was gaining 4 yards after almost every time he touched the ball. He was running angry and falling forward a lot. It was really impressive early. Now, Georgia came right on back, tied it at 10. Auburn with, there's probably a minute and a half left in the half. It was, again, tied 10-10. They had an opportunity to kick a field goal and go up 13-10 or go for it on 4th and 1, and they went for it. Did not get it. I think this was a crucial call in the game. I'm not saying if I was the coach I would have necessarily done anything differently. Look, I'm not a coach. I don't know what I would have done in that scenario, but I know I was scratching my head when they ran the offense out there on 4th down.
I think that's one of those things where if it works out, you'll be looked at as a hero. Like, for example, like when LSU went for 2 against that was against Alabama last year, right?
Yeah.
In overtime. Like, you look at that play and you're like, oh, wow, they're going for it. And then it works. You look like a genius. But if it doesn't work, then you look back and you're like, well, what the hell were you doing? Why wouldn't you play it safe there?
I think in that scenario there's an argument to say the argument there is you're going for the win. You don't want to go back out into another overtime with that Alabama team.
But I think what Auburn was looking at here is we can't beat Georgia with field goals. And then if you look at the final score, they lost by 7. So, I get the situation. I get the call. Like you said, we're not coaches, so we don't really know. But I'm always a big fan of going for it on 4th down in those kinds of situations. And if it doesn't work out, then I would just say be better at going for it on 4th down. But I think I'm a big fan of going for it in 4th and short in situations like that.
I hear you. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with you. Or I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I am going to disagree with you, but I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong. I think to this point, right, it was tied 10-10, and Auburn's defense had played well. They gave up a touchdown, but they also held Georgia to a field goal in another scenario. So to say they can't beat Georgia kicking field goals when a field goal literally would have put them in the lead, I don't know if I buy that line of thinking. I'm, again, not saying you're wrong. I just think I disagree. Doesn't matter. They come out in half. The second half, Georgia receives, right? So I can understand wanting to go up 7, but if you're not going to have the ball, you better go up something. They kick it off to Georgia after one play. Georgia puts it on the turf, fumbles the ball, and Robby Ashford comes in and moves right on down the field. He rushes down the field and ends up scoring. Dejon Edwards ball ties it back up at 17, and now you're 17-17 closing out the third quarter, and from this point on, it's the Brock Bowers show. He ended up racking up, 157 yards. The touchdown that ended up being the last one scored that gave that gave Georgia the lead. It was a ball over the middle of the field. Probably, I think he called it at the 30, made 2 or 3 guys miss, and just took it to the crib. The thing with this game, right? So I did pick Auburn to cover the spread, and I picked that while having Georgia as my power-rated number 1 team overall. I don't necessarily think Georgia did anything that I wasn't expecting them to do. I think Auburn was in wounded animal mode here after losing to Texas A&M last week. They could not afford another conference loss. They got it. They got another conference loss, but they could not afford another conference loss. They were at home. They had everything to play for here and an opportunity to submit themselves as a really legitimate team in year 1 under Hugh Freeze. You go out and knock off the number 1 team in the country. That's a big statement win, and I the way I was looking at this is Auburn's going to give Georgia everything they can handle, and they did. And credit to Georgia for going win that game. That was a tough game to win, and I think that's partly why I have Georgia up there in my top two. A lot of people are going to look at that and say Georgia really struggled against a bad Auburn team. I disagree. I think this is an Auburn team that's in year one, but is really talented and, frankly, good. I don't think they're going to win the SEC West. I don't think they're going to, they may not go to a New Year's Six Bowl or anything like that. They'll probably be a 7-8 win team when it all boils down to it. But I think this is a very capable team, and it was impressive that Georgia could go out there and handle everything that Auburn gave them. All right. Moving on, Michigan at Nebraska. Michigan was a 17.5-point favorite. They won 45-7. Again, Michigan's doing everything that you can possibly ask of them. They scored on the first possession and then beat the piss out of Nebraska for the rest of the game nonstop. Scoring 45 points, allowing only 7. It's dominant. What more can you ask of them?
Not much.
Not much. They're doing everything they can in the games they're supposed to win. They can only play the games that are on their schedule, man. You know what I mean? Like everybody says Michigan doesn't play – wow. Michigan doesn't play everybody. Michigan doesn't play anybody. Ohio State doesn't play anybody. That's fine. You can say that, but they still have to go play the games that are on the schedule, and they're dominating in them. So respect to Michigan. Not going to talk about that game a lot because it wasn't close, wasn't super entertaining, but they did their thing. 3 Texas versus 24 Kansas. Texas, 16.5-point favorite. They ended up winning this one 40-14. Again, the spread was 16.5, and they won 40-14. Now, the only reason the spread was even that close was because Jalen Daniels was supposed to play, quarterback over at Kansas. He didn't play, and, we kind of figured how this would go if he wasn't going to play. He's one of the most dynamic people on the field always, every time he takes the field, and not having him really hurt Kansas. I will say, we remember Texas going out and beating Alabama in week 2. They struggled through 3 quarters with Wyoming the following week. But, ever since the start of that fourth quarter versus Wyoming, Texas has done everything you can expect them to do. They've looked like they've really come together. They haven't really hit any hiccups in the road. They've been playing great football, and I think they're well-deserving of being top 5 team at this point.
Agreed.
And really, it's not the preview. We'll do this later in the week. But really looking forward to seeing the Red River rivalry on Saturday with Texas and Oklahoma.
First time in a while. I forget what the exact year was, but it's the first time in however many years we're going into it, both teams are undefeated.
Since 2011.
There it is. So that's 12 years. And that was a really loud chuck that just went by. Wow.
Ohio State and Florida State were both on bye, so can't talk about them too much or at all. We won't do it. Number 6, Penn State at Northwestern. Penn State was a 27.5-point favorite. They did cover. It was 41-13, and they covered when they could have just kneeled it out. They had the ball late in the game, and they went and covered. So, I might have to start taking them. Might have to start taking their spread. We might mix that into the locks every now and again because, spoiler alert, we missed. Because of this game that I'm going to talk about right now, number 7, Washington at Arizona. Washington was a 17.5-point favorite, right? We didn't even take that. We didn't even take them to cover that. They really should have. I would have expected them to cover by somewhere in the mid-20s to 30s, low 30s. They won it 31-24. This is one of those games where you want to beat your head on the wall and throw your hat and lose your shirt and all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying, man, this is the emotions that I felt. You know what I mean? I'm not saying everybody feels the way I do or gets worked up the way I do, but I was not excited watching this one. It was lots of Dillon Johnson early. Run heavy day for Washington. It was honestly it was odd to see how much they ran the ball. Not that they can't run the ball. It was almost as if they wanted to establish their ability to run it for later games in the year. So I can understand that. It felt like a really disappointing win because it's hard to say any win is necessarily disappointing. You go out there, it's a W on the record, but they're much better than they showed on Saturday, in my opinion. Again, not a Washington fan, but I think they're much better than they showed on Saturday, and they're capable of easily covering that 17.5-point spread against Arizona, especially when Arizona's starting quarterback didn't even play. And it was really, really heartbreaking because I thought we were going to go ahead and get the cover there or really feel comfortable about covering late in the game. And Washington fumbled it on the 5. So, that would have been at least 3 points if they kicked the field goal, and that would have been enough to cover for us on our alternate spread at 7.5. Like I said, we didn't even take the 17.5. We teased it all the way down to 7.5 and somehow still missed, probably because I bet it. And so if you're a Washington
100%,
fan, if you're a Washington fan, sorry, because that might have been my fault. All right. One of the most talked about games of the weekend here, USC at Colorado. USC was number 8 going into the weekend. They were a 21.5-point favorite. I very much expected them to cover that 21.5 easily because, again, Colorado is just not – they're not super big in either trench, offensive or defensive line. And they jumped out to a 34-7 lead with 3 minutes left before the half. It was about that time that I got the influx of text messages, saying that Colorado is just way overrated. I hate hearing that because let's talk about it. Their preseason win total was 4 wins. I talked about it last week. I'm going to do it again this week. Their preseason win total was 4 wins. They're at 3. They're 3-2 right now, 5 weeks into the season. They need 2 more wins to cover that. I think it was 4.5. So they need 2 more wins to cover that. I am of the firm belief that they will. And to hear anybody say Colorado is overrated is crazy because to me they're overperforming. Are they probably talked about maybe too much? Yeah. That could be true.
That's definitely where it's coming from. Like I remember we were in the same group text in that when those overrated things were coming in, and I think the correct term is overhyped because they came out and started the season hot, and everyone's like, everyone just automatically judged them like, Colorado was much better than we originally thought. And that picture was in our head. And because of recency bias, I think that's why people are like, Colorado actually isn't that good. And anyone who knew anything about college football knew that. They knew that they weren't going to go out and be ranked at the end of the year or be a top 10 team at the end of the year. Everyone kind of knew that if you know anything about college football. But because of recency bias and with all the Deion Sanders hype and all the big stars going to their games and stuff like that, it's kind of getting to other people. It's getting annoying seeing it all the time. So I can see where overhyped comes in. Overrated, definitely not.
But even then, I don't think it's hype. I think there's a lot of talk. Like, for media coverage, you can get clicks talking about Deion. But even then, they're not saying like, look. If you're a fan of college football, I would imagine you'd click on College Game Day, or you'd watch ESPN or SportsCenter or any of the networks that cover college football. And none of them were taking Colorado to beat Oregon last week. None of them took Colorado to even come close to losing by 7. So I think they're either perfectly rated or slightly underrated. And look, I'm not of the belief that Colorado is underrated, but I damn sure didn't expect them to go put 41 on USC this week. And be in a tight game. And even furthermore, I didn't expect them to be down 34-7 with 3 minutes left in the first half and claw their way back. That was the most impressive thing I saw out of Colorado this week. And then, look, here we are doing this thing where Colorado lost, and now we're talking about them. So
see, we're part of the problem.
Maybe we are. Maybe we're part of the problem. But it's not because I want to sit here and talk about Deion, and it's not because I want to talk about the last name Sanders for Shadur or Shiloh. It's because y'all are doing it, okay? Y'all are doing it, and y'all are hating on Colorado while they're clawing their way back into games against a top 10 team and putting up 41 on USC. So that's how I feel about Colorado. If everybody else would just stop talking about them or stop acting as if they're supposed to be a national championship contending team, then I would have much less to say. But whenever we're going to sit here and drag a team that is playing their ass off and being in games, being in a game that they shouldn't be in, because they weren't in the Oregon game, but being in this game that they really shouldn't have been in from the jump, somebody's got to defend them. That's how I feel. Now, let's talk about USC because they offensively are really, really good. Now, again, they didn't score a ton in the second half. I think whenever you get up 34-7, it's very easy to go over to the sideline and start talking about next week's game. And that is something that elite teams don't do and can't do. Caleb Williams, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, for sure. I think they have a really, really nice receiving room over there. Defensively, they have some work to do, and I think that was exposed in the second half of this game. They still have a tough road ahead of them. They're going to have to play Oregon. They're going to have to play Washington. They still got to go see Notre Dame. So they have some tough games coming up, and I like where USC sits right now, but I think their record could be taking some damage here in the near future.
Agreed.
Let's stay in the Pac-12. Number 9, Oregon at Stanford. Oregon was a 27.5-point favorite. They won 42-6, and this was a straight-up beatdown. I mean, it was a spanking. It was like Stanford did something wrong and then mouthed off back to the dad, and so he might have got one of those whoopings that you get as a kid. And that's what it felt like because Oregon was Stanford's daddy in this one. And honestly, flip the camera. You could show it. What?
Show what?
How hard you're laughing over there.
They hear me.
But that's the reality of the situation, and that's why I have Oregon so much higher than USC. I don't even have USC in my power rating top 10. And again, that's just because I think there's a lot of things that USC needs work on and not much that Oregon does. Oregon's a damn good team right now, and they're firing on all cylinders all across the field and the board. So I love where Oregon sits. Again, they still have some tough games on their schedule. And we'll see how that plays out. Utah and Oregon State played on Friday night. This was a fun one. Oregon State was a 3.5-point favorite. They won it 21-7. The game was a lot closer than the 14-point difference, though. It was a slow grind of a game, and not a great offensive day for either squad, really, but Oregon State did end up getting it done. I'm liking Oregon State more and more every week. They can go out and look. I know they lost the game to Washington State, and I lost the game just now. But
why do you have to bring that up right now? Why would you ruin my night like that in the middle of the stream?
That's how it goes, man.
Now you guys all lost the game too.
Yeah. So I know they lost to Washington State, but even in that game, they showed a lot offensively to me. And then you flip the script here, and you have a much slower paced game, a lot less points being scored. And they said, hey, we can play that ball too. And they did it well. I know I said the game was closer than 21-7. It felt that way, but also it never really felt like it was in question. It felt like this was a close game that if Utah can take advantage of something, in one way or another, then yeah, we might be tied up. But it never necessarily felt like it was in question for Oregon State, at least to me.
Agreed.
Utah really, really, really misses Cam Rising.
Yeah.
They need to get him back yesterday. And when they do, they could be interesting. All right. Number 11, Notre Dame at 17, Duke. Notre Dame was a 5.5-point favorite. They won it 21-14. This was one that, look, I said that I liked Notre Dame to win. We gotta figure out a way to pull clips from last episode and get them in here because we could run the tape. And do you remember what I said? Because I do.
About Notre Dame Duke?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly what you said. No.
Great. Thanks, Mikey.
Do you remember what you said?
Yes, and I'll
then
tell
say
you.
it.
I will inform you. So, I said that I think Notre Dame is a much better team than Duke and should win by much more than one possession. But I picked a one-possession Notre Dame win because Notre Dame got beat up against Ohio State a little bit.
You did say that.
Yeah.
Okay, I remember this.
Because Notre Dame got beat up against Ohio State a little bit, and Duke is in a real position to go and cement themselves at the top of the ACC right now. They could have added this Notre Dame win to the likes of a Clemson win, and then be looking at the field of Florida State. I think that's going to be a good game when we get to that. But then Louisville, and there's a lot of teams over there that I don't think there's a lot of teams that are true playoff contenders. But I think if Duke would have found a way to win, they would have put themselves right in the mix with Florida State. So that's why I thought this was going to be a good game, and it turned out to be just that. Unfortunately for Duke, they lost Riley Leonard. He's going to be out for I don't know how many weeks. Was it 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Right there at the end of the game, they lost him. class act about Sam Hartman to stay out there and wait on Riley Leonard to come out the medical tent. But this was a really good game. I was impressed by both sides. Again, I think a lot of people, much similar to one of the games I was talking about earlier, I think a lot of people can look at this and say, why did Notre Dame is a fraud? They lost last week. They only beat Duke by 7. Hey, I think, one, Duke's a really good team, and we should respect them for that. I was guilty of not doing that several weeks ago, and I came into last week's game Saturday's game with Notre Dame, and I said, hey, let's start giving Duke the credit they deserve. So, yeah, I think, one, Duke's a really good team, but two, Notre Dame's coming off of that really, really tough loss to USC after only having 10 guys on the field in the last 2 plays. And I think to go out and get a gritty win like this is almost it's a signature. It is a signature win for Marcus Freeman. Regardless of the name Duke when talking about football, this was a good win. Mm-hmm. Number 12, Alabama at Mississippi State. Alabama was a 14.5-point favorite. The line or the spread was that close because Alabama's really struggled on offense lately, and they won it 40-17. Bama had 31 points at half. Jalen Milroe showed you exactly why he's a starting quarterback. He had that 54-yard rushing touchdown to put Bama on the board early. He's the most dynamic quarterback on that roster, and it's not close. Whenever you saw Tyler Buckner against USF, Southern Florida, he showed you why Jalen Milroe was starting previously, and then you saw a little bit of Ty Simpson, and I think you all had your answers. It needs to be Jalen Milroe. Whether you love or hate that, it needs to be Jalen Milroe, and then he showed you this week why it's him. So really happy for him. Great performance by Alabama. Again, they scored 31 in the first half. They only ended up scoring 40, but when you get up like that, you don't have to keep piling on. So big win for Alabama there. 13 LSU at 20 Ole Miss. LSU is a 2.5-point favorite. Ole Miss ended up getting the win here, 55-49. If you're a fan of offense, this was the best game of the weekend, and it wasn't close. If, like me, you love defense, this was miserable. I mean, neither team could figure it out defensively, but let's talk about Ole Miss first. Over 1,300 yards of offense in the game, 104 points scored, and about 50,000 Ole Miss fans on the field, and here's why. Jackson Dart rushed for 50 yards while throwing for 390 yards, 4 touchdowns. Huge day for him. Best game of his career. He said it was the happiest he's ever been after the game. So that was awesome to see in the post-game presser. Quinshon Judkins finally got going. He had 170 rushing yards of his own and a pair of touchdowns. And this is a team that has really struggled on the offensive line and to get this run game going. And they, Quinshon had a great day. Jackson Dart got 50 yards of his own. This is the same team that we're talking about that was held to less than 100 yards rushing by both Tulane and Alabama. They combined for over 300 yards on the ground on Saturday. Really, really impressive. Even more impressive to me, no turnovers and no sacks.
That's very impressive.
Really impressive. They embarrassed LSU's front seven and embarrassed LSU's secondary. It was just an offensive clinic put on by both teams. And I say that because we can't talk about this game while not talking about the 400 passing yards Jaden Daniels threw for and the 4 touchdowns. Again, also, Jaden Daniels ran for 100 yards of his own. It was 99. He ran for, somewhere between 97 and 99 yards on the day. And statistically, I know we just went down the list of everything Ole Miss did offensively. Statistically, LSU had the better day. It just couldn't come down with the touchdown on that last play of the game. Went right through the receiver's hands. It was a great ball by Jaden. Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors both covered 100 yards receiving. Like I said, Logan Diggs crossed 100 yards rushing. So, yeah, like I said, neither team really played defense, and this is a great signature win for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. I don't think either team can feel great about the way they performed defensively. Now, Ole Miss feels a little bit better because they got the win, and they can look back in the rear view and say, we got past Alabama and LSU in back-to-back weekends and split it. So, they feel great.
Yeah.
But they're still going to have to play Texas A&M. They're still going to have to play Auburn. So they have some things. Look, right now they're sitting prettier than LSU is in the SEC West, but they still have some things to figure out. if they're going to really make a push for the Western title. They're going to need Alabama to lose a game. And look, honestly, Ole Miss just became really big fans of Texas A&M because Ole Miss still gets Texas A&M down the road, and Texas A&M gets Alabama on Saturday. So we'll preview that game when we get there. But if Texas A&M can find a way to beat Alabama, then Bama still has to get by LSU and Bama would still have to get by LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn and sweep those games to remain atop the SEC West. And if they can't, Ole Miss may find themselves there for the first time ever. By the way,
wow.
Ole Miss has never been to Atlanta to play in the SEC West Championship. I know they do like to claim the 2003 SEC West champions, but they did not win it, believe it or not. All right, number 14, Oklahoma versus Iowa State.
Oh, before we get into that,
go ahead.
You were actually at that game this weekend, weren't you?
Yeah.
And if you guys want to go to the games, be sure to download SeatGeek and use promo code 10-second runoff right here, as you can see, the same as our Instagram handle. Use that for $20 off your ticket. There we go.
Great plug there, Mikey. That was a good plug. I like that. You should do that more often. 14, Oklahoma versus Iowa State. Oklahoma was a 19.5-point favorite, and they put up 50 points yet again, only gave up 20. Giving up 20 to Iowa State is kind of rough, but I think whenever you're scoring 50, it's okay. There's garbage time points that happen, and that's what happened. So Oklahoma is, again, hey, they're in my top 10 right now. So I feel really good about Oklahoma, and I cannot wait. This weekend we have some really good games. I think Bama Texas A&M is going to be a really good game, but there's no game on the slate this weekend better than Oklahoma Texas, and I am ecstatic to talk about that on Thursday. No Wednesday show this week. We're going to be Thursday night.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, North Carolina, Washington State, and Miami were all on bye, so that takes us to number 21, Tennessee versus South Carolina. 12.5-point favorite were the Vols. Tennessee wins 41-20. This is a big win for them. They go avenge the loss last season to South Carolina whenever Hendon Hooker tore his ACL. That was a rough loss for them last year, but they go get the win this year, scoring 41 points. Problem is, and we don't have to talk about this game too much because at this point South Carolina has 3 losses through 5 weeks, and Tennessee looks better. They have the 1 loss to Florida, but they do look significantly better than South Carolina and looked that way on Saturday. Problem is, in the process, they lost Brew McCoy for the season. That hurts bad. That hurts really, really bad because they go into a bye week next week. But when they come out of that bye week in week 7, they have Texas A&M, Bama, and Kentucky back to back to back. They get UConn and then Missouri, and then immediately after Missouri they have Georgia. So 5 of their remaining 7 games are really, really tough games.
That's tough.
I think all of the 5 games that I mentioned 6, but excluding UConn, Texas A&M, Bama, Kentucky, UConn, Missouri, and Georgia, really, really tough games. I think they're winnable. I think those are winnable games, but it's
talk about a brutal back half of the season.
I mean, really, really brutal. Really brutal. This team could not afford to have lost to Florida early in the season.
Agreed.
That really, really hurt the outlook of their season. Now, that being said, we'll get to Florida literally the next game. But with where Florida sits, they now have 2 losses, 1 in the SEC. If Tennessee can find a way to string it all together, and those are 5 tough SEC games to win, but if they can find a way to win those, they very likely do win the SEC East. Yeah, I'm not predicting that.
Yeah, I was going to say they would have to win damn near all of those. And if they don't, then hope for some other things to fall their way.
But the point is that I'm trying to make is that unless Florida can find a way to beat Missouri and Georgia, you know what I'm saying? Like Tennessee, for all intents and purposes, Tennessee still controls their own destiny. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Now, for how long they'll control it, I don't know. 22 Florida at Kentucky. This is the reason why I was even talking about that. Kentucky was a 1.5-point favorite, and holy crap, they beat the dog crap out of Florida. It was 33-14. Now, here's something really interesting. You and I haven't spoken about this game yet, Mikey. Devin Leary, starting quarterback for Kentucky, did not throw for 75 yards.
Yeah, because Ray Davis is him.
Well, I don't know if it's because Ray Davis is him, but
regardless.
But Ray Davis is him. Now, the point I was trying to make is if you showed me a box score and said, hey, look, this team's quarterback threw for 69 total yards passing,
Nice.
Who wins? I'm going to say the other team.
Yeah.
Now, you would have had to leave out the part that team's running back ran for 280 freaking yards and quite literally ran Florida out of Lexington.
I'm pretty sure. I know at one point he was, but I don't know what he ended the day at, but I'm going to look it up. I'm pretty sure at one point he was averaging 20 yards per carry. And that's not even like, oh, he had one 80-yard run and the rest were – like, no, he was averaging 20 yards a carry.
Yeah,
it feels like every time he had the ball, he was gaining 20-plus yards.
He had 200 yards by halftime. Dude balls, man. I said that I thought Florida was going to win, and I did expect Ray Davis to have a hell of a game, and I knew he was a monster. But I figured that, and honestly, kind of what happened is what I thought would happen, but not the final score of the game. And I definitely didn't expect Ray Davis to have 280 yards rushing. But I said that I think Graham Mertz will be able to have a decent enough day passing, and Florida will be able to, they'll be able to put some yards together on the ground of their own. And I think that will counterbalance what Ray Davis does. I figured Ray Davis would have the best day of any back, but he blew that out the water far and away. Huge statement win for Kentucky. All of a sudden, we got to really start talking about Kentucky.
Yeah.
We got to start talking about Kentucky because just like those other teams we mentioned, Kentucky's going to get their own shot at Georgia down the road. They're going to get their shot at Tennessee. They blew Florida out the water. And Missouri is an interesting one too. So that SEC East just got, over the course of this weekend, it felt like the SEC East just got really competitive.
For sure. And looking at Kentucky's games, they haven't scored less than 28 in a game, and not saying that they played great competition, but they scored 44 against Ball State, 28 against Eastern Kentucky, 35 against Akron, I believe.
Yep.
45 against Vandy, and 33 against Florida. So they're putting up numbers.
Yeah. And on the ground. So really impressive. Really impressive. Really impressed with what I've seen out of Kentucky. Number 23, Missouri, still in the SEC East at Vanderbilt. Missouri was a 13.5-point favorite. They covered that 38-21. They were down 3-0. They were down 3-0 after the first, but all Missouri from that point forward. Not going to spend too much time on this game. Vanderbilt is quite literally horrible, and I don't want to talk about them.
Ever since week one, you've just been the biggest Vandy hater.
Bro.
You were talking them up week one. You're like, you know what? I think they have a chance of winning us this parlay, and then they did not.
Well, I took the stance that they weren't the worst team in the Power 5 and doubled down by putting them in our parlay. And now, granted, I didn't take them to cover the original spread, but I teased it all the way down, and they couldn't cover that.
It's because you bet it. If you didn't bet it and someone else did, it might have
Vanderbilt
happened.
blows, Mikey. They suck.
They were running construction during the game. They had workers working on construction during the game.
Yeah, it was probably more entertaining. Missouri's really good, though. Wow, I think Missouri is really good and they're not getting talked about to the level at which they're playing. They get LSU next week at home, and that's a game we're gonna have to really break down because LSU's playing great offensively. But LSU looks horrid on defense right now. So Missouri,
their defense is 117th, 119th right now, and they have the fourth best offense.
Yeah,
117 on defense.
And by the way, I fully expect Missouri to take every possible advantage they can of that 119th ranked offense of LSU, or 117th, whatever it is. You said two numbers. Now I'm confused.
Meet in the middle. It's 118.
All right, that works. Bad. Really bad.
Yeah, regardless, it's dog.
Yeah. I think Missouri's going to take advantage of that. I'm not going to predict that game yet. We're not even previewing. But that's going to be a game to keep an eye on and could be really, really interesting. All right. Fresno State versus Nevada. Fresno State was a 24.5-point favorite. They did not cover. They won it 27-9, but they got their first win of the season as a ranked team. So congrats to them. Golf clap for them. Mikey, go ahead.
What?
Golf clap for them. There it is. I'd like to see that. All right, that was all the games, all the ranked matchups of the weekend, or all the games featuring a ranked team of the weekend. I know I already said, spoiler alert, we lost the lock parlay, but I'll read through it one more time. Washington -7.5 over Arizona because they fumbled on the 5 and didn't throw the ball all game, so that was good. Thank God for that. Missouri -5.5 over Vandy. That was -340 odds. Smooth cleared that. And then Oklahoma -9.5. They put up 50 points, so solid there. Total odds were +106, so you could have bet $100 and won $160. Or 106. I'm sorry. Could have bet $100 and won $106.
But you didn't.
Yeah, but we didn't. We didn't do it. Matter of fact, we lost the money that we bet on it. So that's how that goes. Again, some really, really good games coming up this weekend. You have Texas and Oklahoma. You have Alabama, Texas A&M. You have LSU, Missouri. So if you're going to any of those games, do not spend an extra $20 that you don't have to.
That's 2 stadium beers.
Yeah, man. You can go get 2 beers. You can get 2 beers with those $20.
Or you could be smart and use it before the game and get a whole case. Or damn near a whole case.
That's not a bad plan.
That's the move.
I was going to be pissed at you for saying don't buy 2 beers, but you went with the strong
buy
tactic
more beers.
Buy more beers. Hey, I'm in on that. Go do that. Save your $20. Go buy beer. Go, do whatever you want with your $20. I'm just saying you can tailgate and have a good time. Regardless, save your $20. Go to SeatGeek. Use code 10SecondRunoff at checkout and get $20 off your first purchase. That's all we got for this show, guys. Really appreciate y'all. See y'all Thursday.